and welcome to Hot Tech and Topics from VMware Explore 2023. Today's webinar is sponsored by VMware and Rubrik and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Keith Ward. I'm with Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this especially timely presentation. But before we get to today's discussion, we do have a few housekeeping items that'll help you get the most out of this session. First off, check out the questions tab in your webinar, which is where you go to ask us anything, just like Reddit. All right, today we're answering questions you've previously submitted as well, but you can certainly ask more. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues you might be experiencing. A browser refresh is the first thing you want to do to fix most audio, video, and slide advancement issues. If that refresh doesn't get the job done, though, let us know and we will get right on it. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find a number of important resources, including a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's vast library of printed resources on technology topics. There's also a link to the ATM Events Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events. We undoubtedly have some you'll want to catch, so check them out and sign up today. Third, at the end of this webinar, we'll be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant, which might be you. Now, remember, you have to be in attendance during the entire live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of the prize drawing can be found in the handouts section. And with that, let's get to today's free-ranging and fun conversation. I'm about to be joined by Marshall Ann Busby, Director of Product Marketing for VMware, and Jason Cook, a Sales Engineering Director for Rubrik. We're going to be talking about what happened at VMware Explore just a few weeks ago, and I cannot wait for this to get going. So, Marshall Ann and Jason, I am told, are willing and ready and rested and want to get going. So here we go. I'm going to bring them in, and we're going to get right to it. Okay, so here we go. I'm pleased to be joined by Jason and Marshall Ann here, and we're going to just dive right in. So here's a question for both of you. Marshall Ann, you can answer first, and then Jason. What are the top 3 trends that you saw at VMware Explore 2023 that'll have the biggest impact on IT organizations in the next year? Marshall Ann?
Awesome. Thanks, Keith, and thanks for having me here today. I think the first one that we saw was just, this continued focus on hybrid work. And I think that's probably not a surprise to anybody that's in the audience here today. And, hybrid work certainly is a reality. But what we're finding is most organizations truly haven't settled on an approach for how to best do hybrid. And people are still figuring that out. I think the other aspect of that builds in is, now digital workplace teams and owners are also focused on supporting not just their knowledge workers, but also their frontline workers, bringing them more into the fold, treating them as a part of the entire organization, and extending some of those services to them to make them feel like a part of the company culture. The second trend that we saw is a focus on shifting left from an IT perspective and how you can scale your team to do more with less. I think the skill shortages, once again, probably not a surprise to anybody that's here today. So, how can you take that concept that first started kind of in the DevOps world and bring it into your ITT teams to help them be more successful? And then third, we made the joke, and I think it's completely appropriate. You can't leave a conference these days without hearing about AI and generative AI. It's really, kind of the next frontier, if you will, from a technology perspective. And I think something all CIOs and CISOs are looking at for how they can best leverage within their organizations.
Great. Jason, what is your take on that?
Yeah, Marshall Ann, I couldn't agree more. That's the buzzword du jour these days is AI, and anytime you can talk about AI, you get some interest. Nobody quite sure what it is, but they just want to hear about it. I think the first thing for me, Keith, is how to navigate the world of public cloud, how organizations and companies are managing to either transitioning some of their applications there or if they are already there, how do they manage this hybrid world? I heard a lot about that, and particularly in a multi-cloud world where it's not just one particular public cloud provider. And obviously, VMware offers great services on top of those public cloud providers. So it's a lot about, okay, how do we leverage that? And then how do we get the best out of the cloud native services and sort of converge all of that together? The second trend I heard was really related to the first one, which is how do I get a handle on all of the applications I have and categorize them and classify them so that I know what would fit best in a infrastructure as a service model, what would fit best in a cloud native or platform as a service model, and then what could I take to SaaS or software as a service, really? Because I think as you look at migrating to cloud or leveraging public cloud resources, that becomes very important. You have to determine is, do I have a cloud friendly application, or do I have something that isn't and may need to be refactored or simply transitioned in some other way? Or do I need to bite the bullet and just simply run infrastructure as a service up in the public cloud? So it's a lot of, architectural and sort of business strategy around how they're going to use that, because I think there are very big initiatives, certainly in my travels, of talking to accounts of all sizes to find a way to leverage public cloud. And then the third thing, something obviously very near and dear to my heart, but holistic, is how do I secure my environment, and how do I secure my data for maximum recoverability if in the event that there's an incident or breach, either material or immaterial, as well as how do I take advantage, particularly when I'm in the public cloud, for example, of security configuration and services, say, for example, that VMware provides. There was a lot of buzz around some updates to NSX and thinking about how folks can leverage that and get into that. But I think it all kind of channels into the stream of data security. So that's what I heard.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you both hit all of the really hot button issues that we were hearing about, that we were seeing at the show this year. So next up, how can IT organizations best prepare for the challenges of multi-cloud, and what are the key considerations for migrating to a cloud native architecture? So obviously, this is something that is top of mind for so many organizations. Jason, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, sure. And pretty good segue, because I think it's certainly top of mind as far as what I heard at the conference. So I think number one, how they can prepare is, as I noted earlier, is get a really strong and documented sense of all of the IT services and applications that are currently in the business. Not only just what they are, but also how they're architected. What are their components, their subcomponents, right? What are the downstream end users, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because I think that has a lot to do with how naturally a business or a company would adopt public cloud. I mean, the reality is that it's still serving IT applications for the purposes of business use. So knowing what your landscape looks like architecturally will help you determine how to get those applications into the cloud, and or would they need to be refactored to leverage cloud services. I think as far as just overall multi-cloud from an IT perspective, it's having tools and solutions, as well as people who are capable of, who have the knowledge as well as the background, and from a tooling perspective are capable of seeing all of that and putting that into as centralized of a view as possible. What I find sometimes is, especially in large organizations, there's a very fragmented sense of tooling, and there's a lot of things that they have to turn to in order to get things managed. When you're multi-cloud, the more consolidation you can do of tool sets and solutions really help the people who have the knowledge do their job more efficiently. And then the other thing is I think for applications and services that perhaps don't have a good infrastructure as a service fit in public cloud, i.e. maybe it's too costly, or there's just too many components, or it's not supported, that might be an opportunity to work with your business to consider either building something from scratch or taking advantage at least of some component of an application with one of the platforms as a service. So for example, as opposed to using a traditional structured database like an Oracle or SQL, maybe you move that to a database platform as a service in one of the cloud native or one of the cloud provider native offerings. I think the more that you can leverage native services, because that really is what cloud native is all about, the more you can sort of game the system, particularly as it relates to the cost of doing computing up in the public cloud. That's my take.
Okay. Marshall, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, certainly. And, I come from our end user computing team, right? So I'm a little bit on the different side. But, a couple of things, right? I think one is you're thinking about how you architect for the future. The tools and the vendors that you partner with are super important. And, asking the questions, is this a SaaS offering, that is cloud native? I mean, that has benefits that span, all of the insights that we saw across the conference, right? Ensuring that you're a more secure environment, that you are meeting your SLAs when it comes to, patching endpoints and things like that. And by partnering with folks that do have those, cloud native microservices based architectures, that allows you to be a lot more agile in terms of, if you do want to, upload an app package and push it to, multiple cloud vendors, with making sure that you have those capabilities. So I think it's important not just from how you're architecting, your own applications and your own teams, but also, in terms of the tools and the enterprise systems that you have in your environment that you're partnering with, because they can help ease some of the pain on that journey as you're architecting to that next stage.
That's a great point. And I think what this shows is how mainstream cloud native development really has become. We're not discussing as much should you do it. Companies are seeing the advantages. So now we're talking about the finer details of implementation and usage and things like that. So that's some great insight there. Okay, uh, big topic here. Something on everyone's mind at the show and across IT in general. How can AI and machine learning be used to improve the efficiency and security of IT operations? Jason.
Sure. So in my view, AI and ML is something that you consume, right? If you happen to be working for or are part of an organization which has a very rich development team, and I've worked with many that do, then this might be something that you could leverage or the organization could leverage as far as into the world of their own custom applications. But I think generally AI and ML are things that you're going to consume. In other words, a vendor partner or a manufacturer's product is going to be using these as architectural paradigms in whatever it is they build. In my particular case here at Rubrik, we've inserted AI and ML largely to really change the paradigm from a security scanning as well as a security baselining perspective, which means rather than using signature files or things that have to be created and then fed into an algorithm to get results, the AI and the ML learns or understands behavior, which I think really that's what AI and ML is, programmatic understanding and automated understanding of behavior, to determine where there might be flaws, vulnerabilities, gaps, sensitive information, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I'm speaking specifically of our point of view, which is very heavy into the security aspects of data. So I think for me, as far as how the general user can consume it, it's going to be through a solution or a product in most cases. But you want to look for that because signature-based things or things that have to have something written and then uploaded always have that slight delay or perhaps intense delay when you look at zero-day vulnerabilities, for example. That's where AI and ML make a big difference because what they're doing is they're understanding and baselining behavior, right, in real time, as opposed to waiting for some definition to be uploaded into an algorithm and then sent across whatever it is you're scanning. So I think that's what's important is looking at as you're choosing your vendor partners, seeing how they're leveraging AI and ML to your benefit.
Absolutely. Marshall Ann, AI and ML from an end user perspective, boy, that is fraught, isn't it? So much potential for negative outcomes as well as positive outcomes, isn't it?
Yes. And, I think one of the things we've been hearing from our customers is, my CIO is asking me to come back and tell him or her about how I am using AI and ML already. And I think that is another important thing to remember is, while yes, some of the chat GPT capabilities are just, coming out and coming into the mainstream for a number of months. We actually have solutions that have been leveraging AI and ML for longer than that, and it's already making positive impacts in our customers' organizations. And I think some great examples are both as we look at improving the experiences that end users have on the digital tools that their IT teams are giving them, as well as around security, just as Jason was saying, right? So, a couple of examples, we leverage AI within our Workspace ONE suite to identify insights for, anomaly detection, based on thresholds that are defined, what is normal. And then when something is out of the bounds of normal, either for good or for bad, making sure that that's elevated to IT teams, letting them know, what's available, what is happening in their environment without spending time sifting through data and trying to build correlation and things like that. So that's one application, seeing if there's long log on times to an application that is impacting revenue or a higher than normal crash rate, affecting all of your, operator devices, things like that. Another use case is in, guided root cause analysis. So we're seeing, especially with, hybrid work and the increased permutations of devices, locations, Wi-Fi networks, applications, and all that teams are having to support. It's an increase in tickets. It's very difficult to, support all of that in the same way with the same resources that you were before. So when we do find these anomalies in your environment, being able to correlate, exactly why is this happening? Like, what is the common thread between devices and users where this is happening versus the ones where it's not happening, and giving you with high confidence, what that root cause is. So really being able to cut down on the amount of time that's spent troubleshooting, trying to come up to the mean time of innocence of why an issue is occurring. And that is important, both not just, for improving the employee's experience, making sure that their devices and uptime are high, but also from the security perspective, if there is, a patch that needs to be applied, to make sure that we're not putting, your environment at risk. So we're seeing a few different applications there from really what we already have in the product today. And at the end of the day, it all makes for a better employee experience, using devices with high uptime, minimizing any downtime. And, that just makes people happier to be at work.
For sure. I know that phishing attempts are getting better than ever with, with chat GPT. So this is something, to definitely follow, and putting it to use on the side of the white hats is a really good thing here. Okay. Next up, what are the emerging technologies that are most likely to disrupt the IT industry in the next few years? Marshall Ann, we'll start with you on this one.
Sure. Well, if you had $1 for every time I've said AI in this presentation, you'd probably be able to retire. So, I'm gonna say it again, right? I think what we see the future is kind of building this concept of an autonomous workspace. Something that's self-configuring, self-healing, and self-securing. Really taking IT, out of having to make all the day-to-day decisions to keep your endpoints and users, working successfully. And we believe that, AI and generative AI will have a huge impact on that. And it will be something that we grow to over time, right? How do you build trust? So at first, it'll be keeping, IT on the loop, right? They'll be able to see and review and, accept any recommendations that the system is making. But, eventually as we build that trust and figure out, kind of what the impacts are to making these changes in the organization, IT can be out of the loop and spend time on, architecting for the future, innovating in different ways. And, we think that's a really exciting future to look forward to.
Absolutely.
I think the other thing that I see is, just continued usage and prevalence of, AR, VR, XR, wearables, all of those types of things, right? We're seeing now the Apple Vision Pro, the ability to manage watches. I think the use cases for those types of technologies will continue to grow and, provide some interesting ways to support, whether it's hybrid workers or rethinking how you run distribution centers and loading and things like that. So I'm excited to see, kind of the continued development that we have with those types of technologies as well.
Great answer. Jason, what are going to be the big disruptors that are coming up?
Well, I think,
And you
you
can't
know,
say AI.
AI. I know. I
It's
promise I'm
something
not
else.
going to. I promise I'm not going to. Well, what I think is that everybody in the world of IT, I think just in the world, I mean, even, my parents know what ransomware is at this point, is beginning to realize that cyber threats are so pervasive that it's not a matter of if it ever happens to them, it's a matter of when. In fact, on a personal level, I just received the third notice of breach from a healthcare provider in the mail yesterday. I mean, it's happening constantly, and it doesn't seem to matter whom it is, whether it's a publicly traded entity, whether it's a school system, where it's a hospital. Because I think a lot of industries think to themselves, oh well, I don't have, I make cardboard boxes. My information is not sensitive, or whatever. But the reality is it doesn't matter. Cybercrime is cybercrime, and criminals really don't have a particular, persona in mind when they commit crime. It's all about the crime. So, with that having been said, I think you're going to see this merging of concepts, particularly in IT security, i.e., in the world that I've been in for many years, infrastructure, backup and recovery, data protection, that's not been a security conversation, right? In today's world, where threat actors are behind the firewall and have been for some time now, it is, because people are realizing, well, once I'm breached, the only thing I have is my backups. So I think you're going to see this merging of the two worlds. That is the backup and recovery, the last line of defense, the infrastructure side of the IT house, and the IT security side of the house. Because the IT security side of the house wants the insights on the data. They don't have that today. Their focus is prevention. They're scanning things in real time. They've got agents on systems. They're looking for this and they're looking for that. And that's great. You have to do that too, of course. But the fact is that you're not likely to, and I'll even be bold and say you won't catch everything. And when it gets through, it's going back to. So I think that's where it's going to go, is the merging of prevention and recovery in a similar or a common framework, i.e., concepts like data loss prevention, concepts like backup and recovery, concepts like ransomware detection, anomalous behavior, sensitive data discovery. All those things are merged into a common technology framework as opposed to being disparate. I think that's going to be one of the biggest things that you'll see, and it will be one of the biggest drivers of funding beyond AI that you'll see in the next 5 years.
All right. It's also worth noting, you've been talking about backup, that more and more ransomware criminals are targeting backups.
That's right.
Primarily because they know that if they can get the backups, then you're hosed, and then their chance of getting the payout is so much greater too.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Here's a really interesting one too. Let's talk about some best practices for managing data in a multi-cloud environment. Either or both of you can take that one. What are we looking at now? Multi-cloud is becoming more the norm than the exception these days, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll start. So I think from my perspective, again, it goes back to you have to have data classification, applications classification, and you have to have applications dependencies knowledge and mapping and documentation, right? Because I think if you're either going to approach or move to managing applications and services in many clouds, then an absolute best practice is all right, well, what application is the right fit for a given cloud and why? What particular service or capability does, say, Google Cloud have that Amazon doesn't, right? And why do we need a public cloud strategy in order to, or a multi-cloud strategy in order to service that? So I think that's a first thing, best practice, if you will, is really just to understand your landscape of application serving from certainly a perspective of migrating there, right? If you're already there, it has to be, I've got to figure out ways to make the operations of those environments consistent. every public cloud is going to have its own paradigm in terms of how it does access controls, identity management, application firewalling, etc. Like that's going to be different, but that doesn't mean that even if the tooling and the terminology is different, that the concepts are different. They're all basically the same. So what I believe is a best practice is to really understand how all of that works, obviously technically and architecturally, but then more importantly, come up with a set of standards that are overarching across all of the different public cloud providers, whether it be how you do networking, how you do application firewalling, how you do the provisioning of storage, how you do identity and access controls, et cetera, et cetera. Like I said, even though the nomenclature, the terminology may be different depending on the public cloud provider, the concepts can be the same. So it's the same standard operating procedures that you were doing when you had a private data center. You need to fix to public cloud, particularly multi-cloud, but you just need to be cognizant of, the architectural and terminology differences. And I think the third thing is to really understand how cloud storage, how cloud identity and security protocols and access protocols work, right? It is very easy to make a mistake and open up your data to breach, right? So before you take that strategy, that's absolutely something you will need to do. And then if you're currently in it, a big best practice is to audit that regularly. Make sure that you understand who has access to what. How do we provision access, right? How do we provision storage? To which systems do we tie that to? And who has the capability to do it, and so on and so forth. So those are some of the best practices I think that everybody should look at, particularly in a multi-cloud.
So, Marceline, did you have any additional thoughts, or did Jason cover it so wonderfully that there's nothing else to say really on this?
He covered it well. I'll say, one or two quick things. I think as you look at, managing and delivering, virtual desktops and applications, in a multi-cloud world, it takes a lot of time and it's really complex, right? And so if you look at, solutions like Horizons, for instance, that has the unified control plane, it gives you the ability to not only, measure data kind of across the different clouds, but also, set some of those policies. Unified app delivery is another great example of a way that can cut down on some of the time and complexity. And I think as you, try to have the visibility, holistically across your entire environment, that's really important to make sure that you're operating things in the same way and that nothing is falling through the cracks. But I will stop there because Jason covered it well.
Okay. Now we'll start with you here, Marshall. What kinds of stresses are IT pros facing in the current environment? And feel free to, to look at that from the perspective of end users, and IT pros are facing more stresses than ever, given the dispersed work environment these days, aren't they?
Absolutely. It's placing a huge demand on IT and digital workspace teams. And, I think, once again, nobody's going to be surprised that, IT is very busy with day-to-day tasks, things like just keeping the lights on, right? Dealing with OS updates and patches that keep coming. They don't stop regardless of the world that we're living in, figuring out what zero trust means for their organization and their environment. And getting the digital workspace, right in the context of, more and more devices and apps. And then the last few years, there was this added pressure to massively scale and optimize your environment for hybrid work, which of course is still a big topic. But then adding on top of that, we also have economic pressures and uncertainty of global events, and, IT leaders are facing talent shortages. And then if all of this wasn't enough, we're seeing that more and more internal stakeholders are asking more of IT. The line of business is asking for new use cases and business objectives, and to increase productivity, roll out new strategic initiatives. Employees are asking for, digital tools and access that match what they have in their consumer life, right? Everything should work as easily at work, if not more easily than it does, at home with all the personal apps and devices that I'm using. HR teams are asking, for IT to help maintain culture and employee engagement. And then, of course, security and networking teams need IT to enable compliance, mitigate threats, and agree on the right baselines to measure against. And then, with the service desk, their IT is trying to keep up with everything else, but then they're also being escalated to as, more and more tickets are coming in, inundating the service desk. And then a lot of times the service desk doesn't have the right visibility or access to be able to solve tickets on their own. So they end up escalating. So not only does that put more burden on IT, but it also means a longer mean time to resolution for resolving issues to the employee. And then they're silently suffering and, losing confidence in their teams to be able to support them. So there's a lot there, right? So I think, what we're seeing is, in order to best manage that, and for IT to be as effective as possible, they want to break down silos, embrace automation, and really take that data-driven approach to help them, do more with less, if you will.
Jason, so what were you hearing at VMware Explore this year? What is keeping IT pros up at night?
Yeah. Well, very consistent with what Marshall Ann said. I mean, I agree with her emphatically. I mean, I think just like to sum it all up, in the meetings that I had, some 20 over a 2-day period, there was a consistent theme, the all of it all. There's just so many things that are coming at IT, if they're administrators, if they're managers. I mean, everybody has a different point of view depending on their persona, what matters to them. But I just think in general, it's the all of it all, the pressure of the business to get them to go faster, be more agile, do more. And to Marshall Ann's point, that's almost always with less budget, less people, right? It's trying to find as many efficiencies as they possibly can. And the reality is there's only so many things you can do. But I heard consistently that theme, simplify. And that's kind of a cliche these days. Yeah, it's simple and easy to operate, but there are technologies that come to that table and actually can prove and demonstrate in that way. And I think, there's obviously things that you can do from a people and process standpoint, which are equally as important to help simplify and streamline your IT operations. But there are also technologies that you can acquire that can help you do that. So I think that's what I hear and I feel the most, is that there's so many things coming at them. For example, I hate to bring it up, but I'm going to. What are you going to do with AI? Well, I don't know. I'm still trying to deal with the thing that you asked me to do a year ago, right? I'm still implementing that, or I'm still solving for that. That hasn't changed, and it's still an issue. So I think from that perspective, it's the more simplification they can get into their lives just overall, the better off they are. I think the other thing is dealing with the fact that there are so many worlds that are merging. Cloud, security, infrastructure, applications, containers. There's these AI and API based automation. I mean, there's so many different concepts in the infrastructure and operations world, which are sort of merging together, which traditionally might be separate. So people in that space, whom I talked a lot to, are feeling a little bit overwhelmed. It feels like they didn't have to do those or know about those things before, and now suddenly they do. So there's a sort of a paradigm shift about what, say, a VMware administrator or storage administrator or server administrator has to know or understand. And that's stressful because in IT, you don't ever want to feel like you're obsolete, but at the same time, it's not always easy to keep up. So those are some of the things that I heard, Keith.
I think do more with less is something that's probably tattooed on most admins' foreheads.
Yeah.
These days, isn't it? Because that's what that's the constant sort of requirement. It seems like
Totally.
these days. Okay. So related to that, there's a lot of stressors. One of the biggest, as we've talked about a little bit, are security concerns. So we've discussed this at some length. Is there anything either of you want to add at this point? Maybe a concern that we haven't discussed that they were talking about at the show.
So I'll
add one.
Go ahead, Marshall Ann. You go first.
Sorry, we both had one to add. So I'll start with like the mobile device side, right? I think for many years, particularly people that were, standardized on iOS mobile devices, right? Those were thought to be secure. But I think we're seeing that there's an increased complexity and impact in threats that are impacting mobile devices. And some of that's due to remote working, right? But I think we're also seeing that over 70% of organizations have experienced mobile related compromises, and they described those as major. I think the other challenge is, if a breach happens, you can't always connect it back to something that's happening on a mobile device. But you already mentioned the increase in phishing attacks, right? Whether that's through email, SMS, social media apps, or more. There's so much happening on mobile devices. More and more people are doing more business from mobile devices. So there is data there. So we're hearing that from our customers is something that's increasingly top of mind. How do I take that next step to ensure that, my mobile devices and the data on them are secure, and that I'm blocking malicious links and trying to protect, my employees from being, targeted by these phishing attacks in the most least obtrusive way, still giving them a great experience, but being able to protect that data. So something that we heard a lot about.
Really, really important point. It used to be that your employees would come into the office, right? Sit down at their desk and log on. One employee, one device you had to track. We're well past that nowadays. Jason, you were going to say.
Yeah, three real streams pretty consistently. One is how can I assure and have the sanctity of knowing I have rock solid and recoverable backups to go to, right? So having a storage vault, if you will, that's immutable and air gap, so it doesn't get tampered with. And to the point we made earlier, that gets increasingly complex in a multi-cloud world. How do I do that irrespective of where the data happens to be stored, whether it's on-prem, whether it's virtual machines, whether it's in the public cloud, et cetera. The second thing is from a privacy and governance perspective. I mean, it's no shocker that the world becomes more bureaucratic over time, and there's more compliancy and governance and regulatory. I mean, the SEC just released its guidance around if you have to publicly announce a material breach if you have one. It is a requirement if you do business or filings with the SEC. And so I think from that perspective, and also people that do business in multitude of countries where privacy laws are different, from that perspective, people want to get a handle on where do I have sensitive material in my data so that I've got a sense of, all right, if I'm violating some privacy or compliancy or regulatory statute or law, how, right? And do I know that? And then can I remediate that? So that was one. And then it was the sort of cyber fear, both of extortion of data, which I think relates to understanding where your sensitive information is, as well as, hey, if I get hit with ransomware and I recover, how do I know I'm not just going to reinfect everything again? How can I remove the indicators of compromise out of my backups or out of my data sets so that I can do assured recoveries, either in an isolated or perhaps just straight into production? So I think from that perspective, security wise, that's what I was hearing a lot about: privacy, regulatory, how to deal with that, assured recovery, and recovery anywhere, anytime. Doesn't matter where the data is.
Lots of lots of security concerns. That is for sure. Okay, this one, Marshall, is going to be for you. How is VMware protecting customers against the threat of ransomware? Again, everyone was talking about this at the show. And since it's a VMware show, they're going to want to know, what is VMware doing for me?
Yes, and like I said, very much taking this from the end user computing point of view, and how we protect data at the endpoint, right? So, a few different ways. I mean, first I'll say, security isn't everything that we do, right? So I think you can make an argument that what we do with Horizon, right, with virtual apps and desktops, and the protecting the data from actually being on the endpoint, that is a security offering in a way. Same with unified endpoint management, by managing the device. That also helps secure the device in many ways. But we're seeing that we're being asked to do with more, and creating new solutions that reside on top of those to help you continue to protect, giving the evolving threats that are happening in your environment. Starting on the device side, we have a new offering for mobile threat defense. that allows you to not only detect any threats that are on the device, but also respond and automate how you're protecting. So that applies not just to malware or machine in the middle attacks, but also to any of the phishing attacks that are coming on the device as well. On the another big area of concern for a lot of our customers is how we reduce the SLA staying compliant with patch requirements. So with our we have a risk analytics solution, as well as being able to tie into UEM actions, and now our newest announcement for Intel vPro chip to cloud, which allows you to actually wake up devices and be able to patch them while they're asleep, which has been a huge headache for many of our customers over the years, and a great cloud native solution for ensuring that you're reducing, those SLAs for making sure devices are patched. And then, of course, being able to report and notify employees and users, when a device needs to be rebooted, and giving them the option to choose when that reboot happens. So, tons that we're doing across the board. No matter what your security concern is, I'm pretty sure we have a solution that can help you, and we'd be happy to help you discover that.
Great. Okay. Um, we are about out of time for today. In terms of our questions, you've both knocked them out of the park. What I wanted to do now was give you both a chance to talk about your respective companies and why potential customers, should be interested in working with you and implementing these solutions. Jason, do you want to go first here?
Yeah, sure. Well, a couple of things. One is uh, just fundamentally and generally, we're looking to make the world a safer place. You know, the reality is that digital services, whether they be corporate applications or end user computing or mobile applications, it really doesn't matter. They're a staple of life. I mean, having raised three children, I can tell you full well. I mean, technology is a ubiquitous standard to them. They think about it about as much as I think about a toaster. It just is what it is. But I think goes with that great responsibility, because not everybody in the world has good intentions. Some have bad intentions. And so that's what Rubrik is really building its portfolio and delivering to its customers, is the sanctity and the assuredness that if in the event something happens, and that something being a cyber attack, that they can come back. In addition, we offer customers simplicity and ease when it comes to what traditionally is a very difficult thing, backup and recovery, particularly in a scaled out environment that goes across a lot of different places, like we've talked about in this session: on-prem, cloud, remote office locations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the other thing is we're helping customers really get a handle on understanding where they may have security risk or security vulnerability in their data. And we believe using the backup copies of that data is a novel idea, because it allows them to do all of that analysis without having to impact production serving. I really appreciate the opportunity to get to speak on this today. Marshall Ann, it was great to get to talk with you, and thank you very much for having me.
Marshall Ann, so the VMware show, the experience is one of the shows that everyone looks forward to in the industry every year. I've been to many of them over the years, and it's always a great show. For you, from the end user perspective, what were some of the innovations and some of the things you were most excited to see VMware talking about or coming out with at the show?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is, certainly an awesome show, and I think our mission is, we really want to help our customers simplify and streamline hybrid work, and all of that keeps the employee and the end user at the center. Whether that user or employee is somebody that works in IT or somebody outside of IT. And we made a few announcements that are really focused on how you can scale, right? We've already talked about that, as well as better secure and simplify. So from the DEX perspective, or digital employee experience, that's really how you give your colleagues and your employees seamless access to the digital tools they need to do well at work. And I think that's a really relatable mission, at least, for me. And I'm excited that we have continued focus there, on how we provide tools to make that a reality. Um, I think the other unique thing that we do is, security and experience are not opposites. If you increase one, you're not decreasing the other. But, with our platform, optimizing one optimizes the other. And I think that's super powerful. So, a renewed focus on how we, provide the right security and privacy policies so that employees have a better experience and there's less for IT to manage. And then finally, just how we continue to help you to simplify. The world is complex. The tools that you use to, create that great work experience don't have to be. And, that's why I'm excited that we're, continuing to make it simpler for you to kind of navigate this, complex multi-cloud world, if you will, by giving you some of the tools that you need to really try to simplify that in your organization and break down silos. So if you want to learn more, we have a webpage there. It certainly has some great videos and everything else, or, reach out to one of your account teams and I'd be happy to walk you through in more detail, what this can do in your environment.
Great. Okay. And the final thing up here from Rubik, some links and some ways to get in contact with them. I want to thank you both for being on with me today. It's been a great discussion, forward looking, some of the innovation that we're talking about, artificial intelligence, machine learning, cloud native development, the threat of ransomware, which only seems to be getting worse rather than better. There's so much going on in IT. It's really never been a more exciting time to be here. And I've enjoyed this look back on the recent show, and I think we're all looking forward to next year's show too. So can't wait for that, and want to thank you both again for your insights and for stopping by and chatting with me today.
You bet. Thanks,
it was
Keith.
Great. Thank you so much.
Hey, wasn't that a great conversation? I hope you all learned a lot from it. I always enjoy these freewheeling discussions. VMware Explore is one of my favorite events, as I've mentioned, and it's just fun to catch up on what happened at the show. So that does it for the discussion, folks. I hope you learned a lot. But now it's time for the Amazon gift card prize drawing before we cut you loose for the day. As I mentioned at the top, you do have to be present for the entire event to be eligible for the gift card. And the winner of the $250 Amazon card for this webinar today is Steve Koo from California. Congratulations, Steve. We'll be in touch very soon to get you your card. And with that, everyone, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank VMware and Rubrik for making this event possible. I want to thank all of you attendees for being here, for all of your great questions, and for just spending part of your day with me. It does mean a lot. Now, that concludes today's event. Have a great rest of your day.